I'm Russell Robinson. I'm here at American University. And about 18 months ago, I actually left the federal government after 22 years of service for agencies, U.S. Department of Education, NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and the IC, the VA, and my last 8 years were at HHS, the Program Support Center. Let's kind of get into where we are, right? And so I have a lot of friends who work for the federal government, and we had conversations as we heard about like this impending Schedule F. And over the past few weeks, it's really been these conversations about what should I do? What should you do? And I'm torn because I'm 18 months removed from this, right? I had to make this decision 18 months ago under a different scenario because it was like 100% my choice. But at the end of the day, it really got to, what do I want to do, right? Where do I want to have impact? And for me, it was like, can I still have this impact within the federal government, or could I have a greater impact in academia? But the rubric was still the same. You take your time, you gather data, you talk to as many people as you can, you make sure you know what's going on, and you make a decision. And then you understand that not all decisions are guaranteed, but the goal here is, while it's a little bit more intense right now, at the end of the day, this comes down to change management. And we've been experiencing change all the time. 22 years of federal service. I actually had done some research. If you go back to 1980, there was research starting in 1980 when Ronald Reagan came into presidency from Jimmy Carter, that basically said every election after that, no matter which party has come into control, or whether it's the same leader within either the Republican or Democratic Party, they tend to view Washington and career civil servants as the problem, right? And if you understand that, then you say, okay, how can I normalize this experience? Now, this is a little different right now, right? But it still gets to, for where you are, no matter how you're feeling, like, do I want to navigate this, right? Do I want to stay and fight? Do I want to seek greener pastures elsewhere? These are still normalized decisions. Like, how do you navigate these valleys, these life challenges when things come at you? You kind of normalize them to where you become this more resilient person. And that being said, how are you the person where you take the time to focus on your mental health and wellness for yourself? But, for me, for my family, because my mental health and wellness impacts them. I'm here at American, I'm a professor now, but my mental health and wellness impacts my teams. That's Jennifer, Daniel, Jabrea, the awesome team at Key. So how do I put myself in a position where I am the best I can be from a mental health and well-being perspective, and still build my resilience so that I come out of this situation stronger? So, been talking to my Fed friends. We've had text threads going, emails going. And here's kind of a sum up of how people are feeling, right? They are feeling overwhelmed, in some sense betrayed. When I came into civil service, I had friends who are in the private sector who get awesome 10% salary bonuses every year. And that's not something you get when you're part of the civil service, but you have that job security. You have people who the government is their passion, right? Their particular agency cause, whether it's the environment, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's national security, that's their passion, that's their mission. And they're feeling totally like devalued. Things are happening very fast. So they're feeling, in another sense, very confused. And also there's this sense of betrayal. The interesting thing is, what I have found throughout my time is the stories about civil servants often don't get out. So when that happens, whenever there is a chaos or crisis, if you go back for those here in the DMV, go back a few weeks ago, unfortunately, when there is a plane crash or a forest fire or a hurricane, when disaster strikes, the country always relies on federal civil servants to come through and to now be portrayed as kind of lowly productive, or some of the other things you're hearing, creates a sense of betrayal. Also ideas and thoughts of feeling anxious, not really knowing what's going on, uncomfortable, depressed. And even before the most recent election, if you go back to COVID and you look at some of the research from McKinsey, Gallup, they talked about a workforce and civil service workforce. And for those who are 13, 14s, 15s, SESs, managers who are feeling an extra level of stress, burnout, depression. People are feeling scared, they're feeling unsafe, like they don't have a voice, or if you speak up, you may have an adverse impact to your career. And then since they're feeling overwhelmed. And now that being said, there are a few people who are like, this is a great opportunity. This is a great opportunity. My passion is outside what I want to do, and I'm excited for that. There are people who are also like, my TSP account is fine. Financially, I'm fine, but the identity of what I want to do has been rocked. And it's cool to have all of these different feelings. You just have to figure out how to navigate it as you kind of go to make what would be the best decision you think would be the case for you. We're going to do something different here. So I teach a public administration class. So I'm going to try to spend like a little bit of time kind of explaining the role of public administration. So I'm going to put the Dr. Russ hat on for a minute. This is straight from my intro to public administration class, and it talks about the role of public administration, right? And if you go back to really post-Civil War, when we were trying to figure out like who we were going to be as a nation, that's where there was the beginning of a lot of this public administration theory. So the heavy theorists would be Woodrow Wilson, who at the time was a professor at, I believe, Princeton before he became president, and Max Weber, right? So he's written heavily on this. And if you're interested or you just want to know more about it, we can send you a couple of articles where he talks about public administration. But the role of there was always this balance of public administration theory where you had this Woodrow Wilson view where it would be very much this managerial, efficient system. And from that standpoint, voice of the public administration would be the president. And the way that worked, in that concept, there was no voice, right? The citizens did not have a voice. The workers did not have a voice. It was this kind of small group that made the decisions. And in that instance, they kind of doled out political jobs and contracts to their friends, the spoils system, right? I'm a big fan of the late great Congressman John Lewis, who said, if you do not study your history, you tend to think everything you do is unique. The next philosophy toward public administration is the political view, which started to give people voice, but their voice was through your elected politicians. So the managerial aligned to the executive branch, the political view aligned to the legislative branch, right? And in that point, in that space, the voice of the people, the employees, the constituents would be the congressmen, later on the unions, the associations. That representative block would speak for you. And then the third view is this legal view, which gave people a lot of voice, which got to this aspect of we want to make sure that the laws and the way people are treated are fairly. So the previous two are the executive branch and the legislative branch. The last one represents the judicial branch. And what they came up with was the role of the civil servant should be this group that is not swayed by politics, right? This is the group that upholds the Constitution, acts on the budget from Congress and the missions of the agency, right? So this role of the civil servant was meant to really be apolitical, right? And a side note on Woodrow Wilson, I'm fascinated by him as a public administration scholar, but in a post-Civil War America, you could argue who was the most racist president between Woodrow Wilson and Andrew Johnson, and both camps would probably argue that their person was the most racist. So his view of politics was that the melting pot of America, Blacks, Latinos, Asians, women, remember LGBTQ, disabled, they all had no voice because the role was efficiency. So this was really spelled out in the Pendleton Act of 1883. We've all heard of the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, but the Pendleton Act of 1883 really defined what a civil servant was. So that's our little history lesson on public administration, but it really gets to the role of the civil servant. The career civil servant is exactly what it was meant to be. So now let's get to change, right? And I constantly say when I teach, no matter my student age range last year was 18 to 63, right? And change is a constant, right? So I try to normalize it. I mentioned I've got undergrads who are navigating the things you navigate first year college. I have a 24-year-old who started a new job, which requires them to move to Denver. And it should be great. It could be great. It may not be great. You do your due diligence and you decide. But when I first did this slide deck back in 2017, well, everything in government has changed. Political transitions are changed. Turnover is changed. New SOPs are changed. Technology represents change. So the goal with all of this is you understand, like, I go back to this constant of you really have to look at change and as a challenge. Well, if it's a challenge, I always believe that there are opportunities within challenges. But it really gets to how you manage your wellness. Worked at 4 agencies in 22 years. I've been on various sides of change. And it really comes to 3 ways, right? A change can be good for you. It can be an opportunity. And in that scenario, you have to say, okay, how do I maximize my agency, my power in this role? Interestingly, do I have the resources, right? Am I given the responsibility to get stuff done, but I don't have the authority? Or I'm given the responsibility, but I don't have the resources. So do I have everything I need to maximize this change? I've been part of changes that were bad for me. And you have to figure out why is this bad for me? Is there something I did? Was there something I did not do? Do I stay? Do I look at the long game? Do I look for greener pastures elsewhere? And then lastly, a lot of times it's indifferent and you just have to say, I don't really know, right? I don't really know whether this change is good or bad for me. Here are the questions I need to ask. Let me give myself some time. And then you try to kind of just use that to gather data and then make what you feel could be the best decision for you. So where you are right now, where everybody is right now, this is change. It's very, very stress inducing, but there's still this aspect of, it's still change though. You've been through changes many times before. How have you navigated? Maybe it's moving. Maybe it's the end of a relationship or a marriage. Maybe it's death of a loved one out of order. It's also amazing opportunities, right? I was reading the story on the company here in DC, capital city, Mambo Sauce, right? And it was started by founders who I believe were government contractors, where it was just their side hustle, right? And now it's grown into this multi-million-dollar business. it really gets to how do you navigate your wellness, where and your resilience, where you can make the best decision. So let's get into, we talked about change, but let's get into resilience, right? And I'm big on this as part of my self-reflection class, because difficult times are best for understanding character, right? My older son, I think he'll probably get engaged this year, I think. But the young lady he was dating early on, they had some drama, and I was like, dude, this is great. And he's like, what are you talking about? I was like, chaos and drama will expose her and expose you for exactly who you are. I know in my time in government, I have worked with and for people who are great on sunny days, right? I'm a big British soccer fan. Shout out to Manchester United. And there's a term called a flat track bully, right? And that is an athlete who performs great in pristine conditions against inferior opponents. But if you put him or her in less than optimum conditions against similar or greater talent, they don't have the ability to succeed. And I think as part of my self-reflection class, we do this exercise where we talk about life's valleys, right? Because my minister says, if you're not in a valley, either you're heading into one or you're heading out of one. And when I've talked to students, when on my podcast, when I do consulting, and we go on these journeys where people talk about when life was at their worst or when things were going to the left, oftentimes when they come out of it, they talk about that was the worst experience, but I'm so much better for it. Like under no scenario would I change that. So I think what that gets to is you can normalize this, right? So when I've talked to several of my friends who are in the government right now, and I'm like, please just journal. Like, make sure you're journaling what you're doing. This is going to be a great story for you. A couple times it's been, I know your story. You've experienced worse than this, and you've navigated. So there is this resilience in you. There is this strength in you. There is this ability to navigate it. And what you find is nobody wants to go through the valley. But for me, I know whenever I go through a valley in life, man, I try to be as present for it, because like I know I'm light, right? Even at my darkness, right, there's always hope, right? And that goes to the Bible scripture at the bottom, right? At the end of the day, the goal is you have to have hope. But this resilience is brought about by suffering and enduring challenges. And that makes you a better person, right? And that goes back to family and friends and loved ones. People respond to darkness in different ways. Some people have stronger inner lights than others, but if you know you're a resilient person, then you can be that light for other people to let them know that, the sun's going to come back out at some point, right? If you're not that strong, then you've got to build that. It's like a muscle, and you've got to be around those people who can put their light on your path, right? What good is faith if it's not tested? I remember I was talking to my public administration master's class, and I was like, you want to be an ambassador? You want to be a senator? You want to be a congressperson? But you only want to do this if your party's in power? No, that's not how the game works. Let me get to the bullets up here, right? So when you build this resilience in you, it improves your mental health and well-being, your ability to adapt and be agile. Think about your work career. Think about that employee, that boss who had no ability to maintain their stress or their anxiety. And now they're expecting you to lead them, right? We're talking about this in the context of work, but this is all of your relationships, right? Your colleagues at work, your family, your spouse, your partner, your children, your crew, right? For me, it's my circle of love. It's about 7 or 8 people, and it's my job to light their path, or maybe their job to light my path. Better learning experience, right? This is what makes you the better person. And that gets to mental health and well-being. And I'm a big fan of this slide. This is the Surgeon General's framework on mental health and well-being. Came out, I believe, in 2022. Probably one of the top 5 documents in my time in government that have come out. And basically, it talks about, here's how you create this aspect of mental health and well-being, right? You have to create a space where you feel like you have created the sense of connection and community. Because at the end of the day, people want to move in and out of spaces where you're heard, valued, and connected. I'm doing a recruiting event for the university for next year's freshmen. And I'm going to tell the parents, I've been doing this for a minute, right? It doesn't matter where your kid goes to school, for what I'm getting ready to say, as a parent, as a professor, no matter where a kid goes to school, if your child goes to a place where they have a tribe or tribes, where they're valued, heard, and connected, the data say their academic and social experience far exceeds those who don't have that. You also have this aspect of feeling valued, of having work-life harmony. And what I love about this is it's not work-life balance, because balance is a trade-off. Harmony is a blend, and you have to figure out in this world what that is for. I have friends who, truth be told, love being in the office because that's where the connection happens. I had a student a couple years ago who was like, his commute was 1.5 hours each way. He's like, I've got 3 hours back to my life every day. I invested 1 hour in myself, 1 hour in my wife, and 1 hour with my kids. I'm in the best shape of my life. My wife and I are acting like when we first started dating, and my kids think I'm cool. Under no scenario am I giving that up. And then you get to this aspect of, are you feeling this proper relationship where you have the autonomy and you have the flexibility to lead your life, your idea of purpose? And then you have mattering at work, right? People want to feel like, I guess this is what takes the hit with what we've seen the past few weeks. People want to feel like they matter and they're valued. Nobody wants to feel like they are invisible or that they are irrelevant. So you've got to package this in and figure out, how do you matter? And then lastly, where are your opportunities to grow? Where are your opportunities to kind of be your best self? So we're gonna jump back into the academic hat for a second. And we get to this aspect of, how do you actualize and become the best version of yourself? And I think you really have to break it down by talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And what that gets to is, if you start at the bottom, you have to get to the self-actualization at the top, you really have to start at the bottom and be like, do I have the basics of life, right? Do I have food? Do I have shelter? Do I have a roof over my head? Do I have a place to lay my head at night? An example I use is, if I was teaching this probably at Pepperdine, or a government agency that's been impacted by the fires in California, I can't really ask people to be their best selves if their houses have burned down, right? Then the next aspect of it is, am I operating in a physically and psychologically safe space? People want to feel physically safe no matter where they are. You're not going to get their best selves. psychological safety. You want to feel like you can be as vulnerable and authentic as you choose to be. You're operating in a space that is not fearful. That being said, I've had jobs where I'm at government jobs where I literally sat in my car in the parking garage for 10 minutes like, okay, Russ, can you really go in there and experience what you're going to experience today? And then I get home and sit in my parking garage like, how do I leave all the dysfunction I've seen today and not take it into my family? I've also had jobs where every day I couldn't wait for the day to start, right? And I couldn't wait to get home to talk about the impact I had, right? That's the role safety has. You feel like I said in the last slide, you want to feel like you belong. And when that happens, then how you feel about yourself and your esteem grows. Conversely, if you're acting fearful, feeling betrayed, feeling devalued, that's going to take a hit on your self-esteem, and that's going to impact your ability to be yourself. But you can kind of normalize this, right? If you compartmentalize it, you can still focus on like, who do I want to be? How do I maximize myself and my talents to be my best self? So how do you do this? I think the first thing is you really have to put yourself first, right? You have to get to this quiet space and you have to say like, what do I want for myself, right? And then what do I want for those I love, those that matter to me? What impact do I want to have on my career? But it always starts with this conversation you have with yourself. How you do it? Definitely, you can reach out to some people to figure out what your superpowers are, what your kryptonite is. We're big on reflection and journaling, but it really means taking this time to carve out a space in your day. And what I get is nobody has time, and you're never gonna find you're really gonna have to find a way to carve out a few minutes where you really are finding time for yourself. This is Jocelyn Thompson Rule. She's an instructor at Peloton. She also guest lectures a couple of my classes, and she talks about strength and life from the aspect of you always have time, right? You build strength slowly. So you're not going to have these changes overnight, but if you find times to slowly say, how did today go? Here's what I did well. Here's what I probably could have done better. Here's what I look forward to tomorrow. I am grateful for. Over the course of time, you build this resilience muscle and this wellness muscle. And that being said, I always say this, like the most important relationship you have is with yourself. The words you speak to yourself can do great things and have great impact to you. And if you disrespect yourself, then in essence, you are enabling and empowering others to disrespect you also. So you really have to stop and put yourself first. You have to assess what you have. So I did a post on LinkedIn a few weeks ago that basically said, you always have agency, right? And when things are going great, you understand you have agency and you have power. But when things are not going well, you may have to manifest it different, but you always have power. You always have power. You always have agency. You always have the ability to play the game. So I'm a big fan of The Wire. So my Wire fans know the oft-repeated phrase by Marlo, Omar, Avon, Stringer, a few others is the game, right? You always have this aspect of understanding the role that this power and agency has to you. And during the Super Bowl halftime, you know, the overarching theme of Kendrick's performance was about a game, right? And I've watched this thing like 4 times. I'll probably watch it again because there's always hidden meanings over there. But where I'm going with this is change is just a game, right? You normalize everything like this is a game. I am a player in the game, Here is the way the game is being scripted out for me. I have choice whether I want that to happen or not, right? So you always, beyond agency, right? You always have agency. And I've been engaged in jobs. I've been disengaged in jobs. And what I've learned is when you're disengaged, you always have agency. You have to manifest it different, but you can do that. You also have time. And even when you think you don't have time, you have time. You always have time to ask questions. You always have times to make the best decisions. I know when I feel anxious or rushed or angry and I'm ready to fire off a response email, something will say, you don't have to send it right now. Get up, walk around. You can utilize time. I was watching an NBA playoff game last season, and I think it was one in the Western Conference, but a team was down by one. A team was down by one with 3.7 seconds left. And they threw the ball into the guy. He just caught it and shot it and missed. And the announcers are like, 3.7 seconds, you had time. You could dribble a couple times. You could have passed it to somebody. So even when you think you don't have time, you have time. You always have a voice, right? Sometimes you have a voice in speaking. Sometimes you have a voice in silence, just like power. Sometimes there's power in voice. Sometimes there's power in silence. You always have a voice. And lastly, you always have a choice. The choice may be for the fork in the road. It may be to go to the left. It may be to go to the right. The choice may be, if there's no traffic coming, I'm going to sit here for a little while. What you don't want to have is this feeling like you're hopeless. You don't have a choice. You don't have a voice. You don't have the ability to make timely decisions, right? I think one of the flaws I've seen in government is this belief that urgent problems require urgent solutions, or this belief that all problems require urgent solutions. In actuality, urgent problems require patient solutions. So utilize time, but never give away your power. Understand where your power source is and understand what you want the outcome of your power to be, and then realize whether you could utilize and manifest your power in the way you want or in a different way. How do you create these spaces, find these tribes where you feel like you know what's going on? You are seen, you are relevant. You feel like you are empowered. Empowered people tend to be great. Confident people tend to be great. What set of conditions need to happen for you to be your best self? And where are the spaces? And if they aren't within the workplace, maybe it's a group outside of the workspace. Looked at some research on mentoring and sponsoring for women of color in government. And a lot of times for your women of color SESs, the peer group, the mentor group is oftentimes outside of work, but you have to find that. So it really gets to when you're at that fork in the road, when you have that still moment, when you're trying to figure out what to do, you really have to ask yourself, what do you want? And I often say, you got to be selfish about it. What do you want for you? How does that impact the people, your family, your friends, the people you work with? Where do you want to have impact, right? I've talked to people who were literally like, you know what, if this was a normal, we're going to offer you Vera, I would have jumped on it. But you know what, I'm going to stay and fight. And there are people who are like, I can have impact doing other stuff. Okay. What is your purpose? What are you put on this earth to do? What is your identity? And part of the challenge here is, if you feel like your identity is your job, how does that impact you? For me, at the end of the day, I'm a U5 to U12 soccer coach. That was almost 20 years ago, but I resonate with that. Like, that plays a role in how I teach. That played a role in when I was in government and developing training. What can I learn from this, right? What can I do to make myself more resilient? And lastly, how do I manage my wellness? So I think I saved this for toward the back end. I think you got to develop a routine. So I think I've got a routine in the morning. I either do a 30, 60, sorry, 30, 60 or 90-minute workout, depending on where I am. And I do my meditation in the morning. Yesterday I didn't, because I had to go drive up to New York, and it bothered me all day, because what I found is when I do my morning routine, even if the day goes a little crazy or a little haywire, it gives me that foundation, right? You create your rituals. There's research from one of my friends that was based on employee engagement in a Middle Eastern country, which was fascinating, on how the workers at this company got through COVID. And what they found was, for a lot of them, it was their spirituality that helped them get through. Now, obviously, it's a Middle Eastern country, so their spirituality was based in Allah as opposed to Christianity or other religions. But you had that spiritual foundation, spiritual, mental, physical wellness. You create your boundaries and you're flexible. I think the biggest boundary I found now is I really have to limit how much of news talking to talking heads, because they'll just suck you into a rabbit hole. I have to limit what I seek and search on in regarding today's events. Enough so I know what's going on, but sometimes Food Network is a great place to veg out, because I know if I get immersed in it, it'll suck me into a rabbit hole. You have to constantly assess where you are. I'm a big fan of journaling. You grow by getting uncomfortable. You figure out how you can do new things, but you also have to focus on yourself. You have to take care of yourself. That is the biggest thing in the world, right? These things come and go, but how you focus on yourself is all that matters, because you have to be your best self for yourself and your family and the ones that you love. So lastly, what I would say is, wrapping up, I've often said, you have to embrace the struggle, the valley, right? You have to embrace suffering, because that's where your best learning is, right? And that's where the strongest you comes out of. You have power, right? If you don't get anything else from this, you have power. You always have power. You always have agency. The only time you don't have power is if you choose to give it away. You always have time. You may not have as much time as you want, but you always have more time than your instincts automatically tell you. You always have a voice. Figure out how to be empowered to articulate that voice. Sometimes that's empowered by shouting. Sometimes that's empowered by speaking. Sometimes that's empowered by whispering. Sometimes that's empowered by just being silent. And then realize you always have a choice. You can do your due diligence and you make the best data-driven decision, but you always have a choice.